Minister, thanks so much for your time. I want to start with this, what the government says is attempted economic coercion from the Chinese ambassador. Were you surprised how blunt he was in those remarks?
Good afternoon, Kieran. Those remarks were surprising and they were certainly unfortunate. In no way is the Australian government going to change our policy positions on matters of public health in response to any suggestion of economic coercion from the representative of another nation. Our policy positions are structured such that what we seek to do is protect the health and well-being of Australians. And when it comes to COVID-19, we need to be honest in terms of the impacts, not just in Australia, but around the world. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. Hundreds of millions have probably lost their jobs. Billions of people have suffered disruption to their lives. And it's not asking much that there be a transparent investigation to ensure that the world learns from this and that we are better placed to prevent the impacts of such pandemics in the future.
So what did the Department of Foreign Affairs Secretary Francis Adamson say to the ambassador? And if I can, what was his response?
Well, Kieran, these are discussions that happen rightly behind closed doors. The government's displeasure was made known and the government's been very clear in terms of our policy position and what it is that we seek to have occur. Ideally, we want to see an organisation such as the World Health Assembly embrace the need for reform and improvements to the World Health Organisation and the need for an open, transparent, independent investigation into the causes of COVID-19 and its handling and the way in which the world has responded, so that we are all, every single nation, better placed to be able to prevent a repeat episode in the future.
When you look at the attempted misinformation from the Chinese Communist Party authorities, as an observer, you can understand it in terms of their own population because they do that propaganda all the time. But what aim would there be internationally, as if we're going to buy it, that it didn't start where we quite clearly know it did in China?
China is a valued partner, a key global power, and of course, within our region, Australia and China are going to continue to need to work together well and truly into the long term. So I don't want to go to motivations or casting judgment or otherwise in relation to these matters. Our policy position is very clear, and not just in relation to wanting to get to the bottom of COVID-19, but also in relation to our willingness and desire to continue to have open relations between the Australian people and Chinese people, open trading ties which are important to both countries in terms of the two-way flow of goods and services. And we want to make sure that we are open to maintain positive partnership, positive engagement. And what we would really welcome is an acknowledgement from China that transparent, open investigation around the causes and management of COVID-19 will be good for everybody in terms of protecting populations in every single country to prevent a type of repeat of this episode into the future.
When you look at the situation internationally, obviously we are doing incredibly well by any measurement right now in terms of coronavirus numbers, in terms of the take-up on the app. I mean, Australians are really rallying to this. But I guess, in a sense, because we've avoided the calamity that has been seen internationally, do you think those other like-minded countries will get on board with this call for transparency from China once they emerge from the midst of having to deal with this calamity on their nations?
Kieran, I think it's a fair observation that, firstly, certainly Australia has handled this extraordinarily well, and it's a credit to the cooperation of governments across Australia, but really a credit to the Australian people in the way in which they have accepted the restrictions that have been put in place, embraced the messages around basics such as hand hygiene and social distancing, and are getting on board with downloading the COVID Safe app, all of it enabling us to suppress the spread of COVID-19 and hopefully to be able to return to greater levels of normal economic activity over the coming weeks or months. And so it's really important. But it's also a fair observation that Australia is, because of the successful handling of this, perhaps better placed, maybe has a little bit more bandwidth across governments at present to consider some of the broader issues, such as a global investigation into the causes and management of COVID-19, than other governments who are dealing with true crisis situations in their countries. And we understand that. We'll continue to work with those governments, and the Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister have been very proactive but also very understanding in their outreach with their global counterparts. And what we want to do is to keep working with them, whilst we also make sure that in Australia we continue to avoid those horrific scenes we've seen of mass graves, overfilled hospital wards, corridors and all of the other tragedies.
Absolutely, and you know, you have a lot of engagement with your counterparts from G20 nations. They've copped it in a massive way, from the health sense to the economic sense. There's no doubt there will be pressure from those sorts of groups, surely, once we emerge or start to emerge from COVID-19.
I think it's a pretty basic equation, really. If this were to happen in any single country, well, surely the pressure for a Royal Commission or equivalent type investigation would be overwhelming, and it would be a fait accompli that would occur. And now this is a challenge in the sense that it has happened as a global pandemic across all nations. And so it is a test of the ability and the willingness of the world to be able to respond in a way that gives the same degree of transparency, the same degree of investigation as would occur were it just isolated to a country like Australia. Now that will take a lot of cooperation and a lot of effort across the world to be able to stand up such an inquiry, but it is essential if we are to make sure that we are better prepared in the future to avoid a repeat circumstance in terms of the development of COVID-19 and in terms of the failure, not just in one or two countries, but obviously in many countries, to be able to suppress and contain it as well. This is not just about where it came from, but ought rightly to look at how the WHO advises the world and how the world responds in terms of containing such threats in the future as well.
Treasury Secretary Stephen Kennedy this morning said to the Senate committee looking into this issue, quote, "It's valuable to Australia to be complementary to Chinese growth," unquote. That's in his Treasury speak, but I mean, basically he's saying this is a high stakes game we're talking about right now, isn't it? Because of, in large part, foreign students is one of our biggest exports. And as you well know, the huge number of tourists that come and spend a lot of money here.
Well, those are factors. Australia's resources and energy also help to power much of the manufacturing growth and construction activity within China. Our agricultural exports help to ensure the type of high quality, highly nutritious foods that emerging and growing middle classes demand in a country like China. So our economies are very complementary in a number of ways, and that has sustained growth between the two of us. And China will continue to be the second largest economy in the world, the largest consumer market within our region, and that's why we want to continue to maintain positive partnerships, not just for those economic reasons, but because in the end we will both continue to occupy space within this dynamic region of the Indo-Pacific. We need to make sure that, so far as possible, despite our differences in values and our differences in our democratic structures, that we are able to engage openly and honestly where we have those differences, but also cooperatively to ensure, so far as possible, the peace and prosperity of our region.